Can you see? Can
You're
you
in
all see?
slideshow mode now. Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So I will get. So this is about the book that I wrote. It's 750 pages of finely detailed stuff. I have to say it's very small print. The footnotes I can hardly read myself anymore because my eyesight is not quite what it was when the book was being prepared. But let me move on from this first slide and see if I can show you this one. Here we have a photograph of King Carl Gustaf of Sweden and his queen. And he is a direct descendant of the House of Bernadotte, which was founded by Desiree Clary and her husband, King Carl John, who interestingly was a member of the Order of St. Patrick of the United Kingdom at the time, Great Britain and Ireland. And she is believed by the O'Clery clan, at least, to be descended from an O'Clery, because Clary was presumed to be Cleary. And if you look at the O'Clery clan website, you will find a little genealogy chart from 1890, where one of the O'Clerys actually charted out her descent from the O'Clerys of Limerick, who descended from the O'Clerys of Kilbarron in Donegal and were refuged themselves in different parts of Ireland when they lost their castle. And it's a very interesting story because if you look at some of the French information on Desiree Clary, you find that there's no pretense to descend from an Irish ancestor at all, and perhaps she didn't. I haven't dug deep enough to find out really whether she did or she didn't. But the O'Clerys think that she did, and they've traced it pretty well to somebody who went to France around 1600 or thereabouts. And the interesting thing is that I think King Carl Gustaf, when he visited Ireland not so long ago, actually did acknowledge an Irish ancestry, at least to the Clerys, and through the Clerys, through an O'Donnell. And this is the point that I just wanted to bring out here, that, you know, through Desiree Clary, who had an O'Donnell ancestry on the female side, many of the royal houses of Europe actually descend from Portugal to the two Sicilies of Italy, and Sweden and Norway and Denmark and others. And of course, the current king's youngest daughter is married to an O'Neill, Christopher O'Neill, who's an American. So there you have an O'Neill, O'Donnell and O'Clery connection right there in Stockholm straight away. The photograph that you see here is the Queen signing the Book of Visitors in the Royal Palace in Belgrade. They had borrowed my pen, my UN pen, and actually they never gave it back, but never mind, we will forgive them for that. They were visiting on the occasion of a birthday of Crown Prince Alexander of Serbia. So here you have the Crown Prince, and let me introduce you to the characters in this photo. On the left is myself, holding a book which the Prince gave me a few weeks back, when I gave him a copy of my book, which is in the center of the screen there. Prince Alexander is holding it. And of course, the lady with the flowers is one of our audience today, Vera, my wife, and our son here, Constantine, on the far right, and Crown Princess Catherine, whose name is also Clary Battis. So whether she has a French connection there or not, I do not know. But that's just to say, when you get into genealogy, it gets kind of tricky because you find all of these potential connections, and you're never very sure whether the source is accurate or not. And you have to look for various ways of corroborating the information and double checking it. And you know this better than I would. But it was, you know, it took me many, many years to put the book together. And there were many leads that I had to abandon because they just didn't prove to be well-founded. And before publishing it, I did try to get it run through by a number of people, including Declan Downey and UCD, Catherine Sims of the RIA. Catherine read it like a PhD thesis. And so I felt more confident after they had looked at it. And people like Brian Donovan and Enniclan and others also, and Kay Cabal, who's a genealogist down in Limerick. So we move on here, and I will just show you here the Kingdom of Tyrconnell, actually the domain of the O'Donnells at a certain point in time at its maximum extent, apart from short forays to Drogheda and Kinsale and the like. So the blue area would have been the traditional heartland of Tyrconnell or Donegal, as it became, excluding Inishowen from Tyrconnell. And then you had areas of direct suzerainty, the green areas being Inishowen, Dartry, Carbery, Ferlurg, Maharaboy, Irgella, Cool and Sligo, and then other areas where O'Donnells held periodic sway, which you see as sort of Mayo and parts of Cavan, Monaghan, and of course parts of Tyrone and Derry or Coleraine. So at its maximum extent, it was about the size of Cyprus or Lebanon. And during that time, before the twilight of O'Donnell rule, the O'Donnells were trading far and wide to places as far as Danzig or Gdansk, as we know it today in Poland, but at the time part of Prussia, Flanders, of course, the west coast of France, and all the way down to northern Spain. And they were exporting salmon, herring, tallow, hides, rugs, timber, livestock, and importing armor, artillery, firearms, gunpowder, garments, iron, salt, silk, and wine. And I will make the point here that the one thing they did not import, unfortunately, was science and the discoveries of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. They were not prominent enough to adopt some of the emerging social and cultural norms on the continent. And they were still stuck in their pastoral and nomadic ways, and to their eventual detriment as a Gaelic society clinging to its old ways of being. So in 1954, as I mentioned that I was born then, and that was when Marlon Brando had that movie. I don't know if you can see me holding up these two brochures here. These are the brochures from Untostal, the rally of the clans in Donegal in Easter 1954, and the particular rally of the O'Donnell clan, to which my father went within a few weeks of my own birth, because he was intrigued, I suppose prompted perhaps by my birth as his eldest, to look into genealogy. You know, when you have kids, you begin to wonder a little bit about what you can pass on in due course. And so began a very long journey on his part at that clan, the first clan reunion in about 350 years. And he met up with the Austrian, Spanish, and other branches of the O'Donnells and kept in touch with them over the decades that followed. And gradually I picked up from there with my own research. But what I wanted to point out about this last slide is that this is a genealogical chart that hung in the old Heraldic Museum in Kildare Street before the National Library took it over as an exhibition hall. And it dates back to about 1945. It is imperfect at best because it omits the entire first family of Red Hugh O'Donnell's father, Sir Hugh Dove O'Donnell, the 23rd O'Donnell, and as they put it here, Kings of Tyrconnell. And you can see him in the center of the screen here, marked 17, Sir Hugh O'Donnell, and his second wife, Mary, or Ineen Dove, as we know her, often called Fionnuala as well, and Red Hugh, Rory, and others of that family. But entirely missing from this is the first family that Sir Hugh actually had. And others that you see in that chart are the O'Donnells of Newport, Larkfield, Castlebar, Spain, and Austria, all of whom descend not from Sir Hugh, who's up here, but rather from his elder brother, Calva. So all of those branches are genealogically senior to Red Hugh and Sir Hugh's and my own ancestors, but the latter were the last ones to sort of rule. So to put this a little bit more clearly, you have Calvach here on the left, the 22nd O'Donnell, counting from Ainachem, and various branches descend from him: Newport, Newcastle, Killeen, Ross, Mayo, Oldcastle, Burrishoole, Castlebar, Fahinas, Greyfield, Larkfield, Spain, and Austria. And the chief of the name descends to that genealogically senior branch, according to the chief herald in the 40s. And the Dukes of Tetuan are there, and the Counts O'Donnell in Austria, and so on. But in the middle, you have Sir Hugh Dove, or A. Dove MacManus O'Donnell, who was Red Hugh's father. And from him descend a number of other O'Donnells, and including a branch of the family in France, which had been lost for centuries, and which went extinct in the main line in 1879. And they held the label Chef du Nom et d'Armes, chief of the name and of the arms. And according to records in the Royal Irish Academy, they were also overlords of Boyle and Banna and Chevalier. And then we would connect to that as the Ardfert O'Donnells, and I will explain how we ended up in Ardfert. But here is a bigger picture of, on the right-hand side, the second family, with the famous red hue, Prince Rory, or rather Érua, and then Rory, the first Earl of Tyrconnell, and his son, the second Earl, and then that line was extinct. The famous Mary Stuart O'Donnell, who fled to the continent, cross-dressing as a cavalier, and was quite a successful at fencing, it would seem. And she left a sort of a diary, which is an extraordinary piece of work. And then on the left side of this, you see the first family and the various people who were part of that, and how they descended down to the French counts and to the Lieutenant Thomas, who was in the Ardfert area. So this main line, the last reigning dynasty, were the direct descendants of the 23rd O'Donnell, Sir Hugh Dove MacManus O'Donnell. They apparently survived, and through that first family, not the second one. Winston Churchill actually came through a female descent of that line, one of the daughters, Siobhan, who married into the O'Neills, and then it descends through Vane, Tempest, and others down to the Marlboroughs and Churchill. So Hugh Dove, and then Sir Donald O'Donnell, his eldest son, who was killed in Derrylahan in 1590, Donald Og and others, and as I mentioned, the O'Donnell counts in France, and that first family and the French counts and apparent survivors omitted entirely from the Chief Earl's early chart in the 1940s. So it gets a bit more complicated when you look closer at the interrelationships, because you have Calvach, as I mentioned, the 22nd O'Donnell, who died in 1566 and was succeeded by his brother, Sir Hugh Dove, the 23rd. And Sir Hugh Dove in or about 1569 married his second wife, Lady Maria or Finola MacDonald, the famous Ineen Dove. And at the same time as he did that, the O'Neill, who at the time was Sir Turlough Lunnach O'Neill, married Finola's or Ineen Dove's mother, Lady Agnes Campbell. And they had children, one of whom, Jean, married Sir Donald O'Donnell, the first son of Sir Hugh Dove. And from then we follow down to modern times. Now, that from Donald Begg or Donald Og's son, it goes down here. On the left, we have the French dynasty, and on the right, you have my own ancestors down to my father, Patrick Dennis O'Donnell, and my mother, Stephanie Tyndall. So we'll focus a little bit on the French here, because they are very, very interesting people. Captain Edmund O'Donnell, who actually we have records of him in Donegal, but also at some point he was involved in Jacobite struggles and ended up in Kerry, married Catherine Giles of Ardfert, who was ostensibly eloped with him because she was actually the daughter of a Church of Ireland pastor whose records we have also seen. They had a son, John or Shane or Jean in French, who was known as Comte O'Donnell or Count O'Donnell, and he married in 1711 Marie-Louise Falvey of Kerry, and so we have two spouses with Kerry connections there already, and then they had a son, Columban Hyacinth O'Donnell, a Chevalier of Saint-Louis, who married Marianne de Cartigny, and a second son, Charles O'Donnell, who unfortunately died at sea in 1762 as he was trying to reach Dublin. Columban Hyacinth is a very interesting character because he actually served in the Clare Regiment, and he ended up at one point at the Battle of Culloden in 1745, supporting Bonnie Prince Charlie, Charles Edward Stuart. And later on, he was captured and released, but later on, he was asked or tasked with the job of escorting Bonnie Prince Charlie from Vincennes, outside of Paris, to Avignon and into exile, which he did. And later on, his wife, Marianne de Cartigny, at around the time of the French Revolution, Marianne moved to Rome with their son, Jean-Louis Barthélemy, and she actually was lady in waiting to Bonnie Prince Charlie's daughter, Charlotte, and invigilated, if it were, the right word, or attended Bonnie Prince Charlie on his deathbed. And so that's another interesting connection with the Jacobites, the Stuarts. Their son, Jean-Louis Barthélemy O'Donnell, became a conseiller d'etat, but before he did that, he was part of Napoleon's army when it intruded into Spain. And in fact, Jean-Louis Barthélemy O'Donnell was the intendant, or the supervisor of a large part of northern Spain, including Valladolid, where there are currently excavations underway to try and find the remains of Red Hugh O'Donnell from the old, what's left over of the old Franciscan monastery there that was otherwise destroyed. Now, Jean-Louis, therefore, may have been one of the last O'Donnells to actually see Red Hugh's tomb before it was destroyed, rather when the monastery was destroyed in the decades that followed. But he had to retreat then to Paris in around 1811, 1812. And eventually he, interestingly enough, survived various changes of regime from republic to monarchy to empire, back to republic and monarchy again. They had a capacity to adapt, which is quite extraordinary. They were not at all involved in the French Revolution, and they didn't suffer from it, other than perhaps momentary exiles. But what he did do, Jean-Louis Barthélemy, is he actually was responsible for pandemic coordination of cholera in Paris around 1830. And based on his experience in Paris, he developed what was called the Code Vicinal, which was like a sort of a blueprint for the rural infrastructural development of France, all about secondary roads and things like that, and how this would be important for developing commerce in the aftermath of that pandemic. The Code Vicinal became a very important blueprint and one of the earliest examples of a rural development plan, as we might call it today. And he had involvement with other things of that type. And he had two sons. The first is Gustaf, or rather, yes, the first we would mention would be Gustaf Anatole O'Donnell, who died at the age of 6, unfortunately. And the second, Sigismund Anatole Comte O'Donnell, who was also a member of the Conseil d'Etat, the Council of State, and who married quite late in life. He married the widow of Charles de Wendel, a French steel industrialist. But his wife, the widow of Charles de Wendel, had already borne children for Wendel and did not bear any for Sigismund, who died in 1879 with no apparent descendants. Now, one of the big regrets I have about all of these O'Donnells in France is that apart from their wives, I have no evidence of other female members of the family. I haven't found a single trace of a daughter. And there were few enough of them as sons. And that's a great pity, because the probability is that there were some daughters there somewhere who may have got this O'Donnell ancestry and who survived to this day in France. But so far, I haven't come across them. Now, they all started in France as members of the Irish Brigade under Mount Cashel, which is to say that they came into French service with their commissions from the French king before King James took exile at Saint-Germain-des-Prés. And then the rest of the Irish Brigade that followed, of course, got their commissions from the Jacobites in France. But because they were under the king, they had a very interesting experience. And I mentioned that the Bonnie Prince Charlie and the way that his lady-in-waiting was actually the Countess O'Donnell. Jean-Louis Barthélemy O'Donnell, he at one time was the mayor, or the mayor of a place called Villiers-sur-Orge to the south of Paris. And they lived in this chateau, a little small chateau called the Maison Rouge. I've actually visited it. And the current occupants are, of course, not descendants, but they do treasure very much the history of the place. And they're an elderly couple. And they were very kind to me when I visited them a few years ago. So the last O'Donnell Countess is this one here. And this is a portrait by Casimir de Balthazar. And she is Jeanne Marthe Marie de Pechperot Comminges de Guiteau. She was actually the daughter of a Knight of Malta, and some of whose relatives and descendants I have been in touch with. And one of them may actually be watching us as we give this this presentation, Stephen Kinloch Pisha. I don't know if he's actually managed to tune in, but he's a colleague of mine in the UN, and he actually connects to these people as well, genealogically. Now, this countess died in 1908. As I mentioned, she had no children, and the child on her lap there is from her first husband, one of the Vendel family. This is where she is buried, in the Château de Souhaix in Bourgogne, where she died. And in the cemetery of Père Lachaise in Paris, which is where you will also find Frédéric Chopin and people like Oscar Wilde and many, many others, Madame Germaine de Staël, the nemesis of Napoleon, and many others. You have these three headstones, which are just above the mausoleum of the O'Donnells. The first is, on the left, is that of Gustaf Anatole O'Donnell, the 6-year-old who passed away very young. In the middle, you have Sigismund Anatole, the last count. And on the right of that, you have his mother, Louise Eliza Gay, the Countess O'Donnell. Not mentioned here on these tombstones is his father, Jean-Louis Barthélemy O'Donnell, but he is also buried there. The tombstones were probably put up after Sigismund died by his widow, who may not have known that the father is also buried there. But we know that from the records. Unfortunately, these tombs are not at all, these headstones are not really taken care of. And that's a pity, but because of the Napoleonic connection, it is possible that with a little diplomatic maneuver from our embassy in Paris, we might someday see the Napoleonic Association take an interest in these people and perhaps support the maintenance of the tombs. Now, I will just bring this to an end with a little photo in the middle here of Ardfert Cathedral in Kerry. Ardfert, as you may know, was once the capital of Kerry. And the O'Donnells ended up there because a nephew of Red Hugh O'Donnell, on the way down to Kinsale in 1602, this nephew, Donald Oge, was deployed on an expedition to help Lord Thomas Fitzmaurice, the Baron of Kerry and Lixnaw, to recover his three castles in Ardfert, Ballykeely, and Lixnaw. Ardfert was the end of the line, as it were. And we know this from the Annals of the Four Masters and also from the Life of Red Hugh by Louis O'Clery. And we also find evidence in the pardons of Thomas Fitzmaurice by Elizabeth I, or James, in fact, James I, when he came to power. We find Donald Oge O'Donnell is listed as amongst that entourage, and there is other evidence that we come across as well. Now, in the upper right-hand corner here, you have the tomb of my great-great-great-grandfather, John O'Donnell, and that tomb is, you can see the remains of the marks of a roof over that area. That was the old sacristy in Ardfert Cathedral, and these O'Donnells put that tomb there when the cathedral was already ruined, but also believing, according to my relatives in the area, that there were previous O'Donnell burials in that area. The significance of this is that it was right next to the tomb of Lady Honora Fitzmaurice, which is the lower left of this photo. You see a kind of a mausoleum there. In the 1980s, and around 1988-89, my great-great-great-grandfather's tomb was moved from that part of Ardfert Cathedral to where you see it now located outside of a wall in the center of photograph. And below right, you see the vacant spot left behind. And that was because there was a great plan to spend a few million by the OPW back in 1989 to renovate the cathedral fully, and certainly to proceed initially with an excavation. So a lot of the interior of the cathedral had to be cleared of many monuments and gravestones. And that was all done. But they never got around to actually finishing the renovation, which would be a great disappointment to Father Leonard Boyle, who was at the time the prefect of the Vatican Library in Rome, who was of Donegal origin. He died in 1999, but he also trained and educated with the Dominicans in Tralee, who also educated my late father. And that's just about where we get with this. Here I'm just showing you the coats of arms of some of the O'Donnells. The popular version of the coat of arms is one on the upper left with the red cross against the golden field. But in the center at that upper level, you see the cross is blue. And that's the earliest version of the arms of Rory O'Donnell, the first Earl of Tyrconnell, Red Hugh's brother. And to the right again, you see another version of Rory's arms in a Jacobite genealogy. This was actually prepared for Brigadier Daniel O'Donnell, who is the man who left the Cathach of St. Columcille in Belgium, and eventually it was recovered by the O'Donnells of Newport and given to the Royal Irish Academy, where it is today, Ireland's oldest extant manuscript. You can see slight differences in the versions of these. In the one on the right, the Jacobite one, you see that the cross is a crosslet, a cross with little crosses on the edges. And that's actually the original version of Sir Hugh Dove McManus when he was knighted in 1567, I believe, by Sir Henry Sidney. That was the arms as they were recorded in by the Ulster King of Arms. The middle row, you have the Lockfield O'Donnells and a cross from Castlebar with this sort of strange-looking triangles, red and gold in the center, and that's carried forward to the O'Donnells in Spain in the center and the O'Donnells in Austria. And this apparently was a version which was allegedly imposed on those O'Donnells by the King of Spain, according to the records in the Chief Earl's office. At the bottom line, you have the arms of Cardinal Patrick O'Donnell, who would be a distant second cousin, I think 3 times removed of mine, but through my mother, who also had O'Donnells. She was descended from an O'Donnell of Glenties. And Cardinal Patrick O'Donnell has the correct version of the original arms on the right side of his coat of arms, and the ecclesiastical portion being on the left. And then in the center lower, you have the O'Donnells of France, the O'Donnell counts in France, which have the crosslet in gold against a blue field. And then the last one there on the lower right are my own arms, as recorded by the Chief Earl, without the hand and the arm holding the cross, but true to the original patrician origin of the arms, according to the legends of the conversion of Connell, from whom we get Tyrconnell and the Kennel Connell. And so, this is all, you'll find all of this explained in much greater detail in my book, The O'Donnells of Tyrconnell. And it had been priced quite highly by the original publisher in Washington, Academica Books. And it was priced by books.ie at $89.99. But yesterday I spoke to the man who runs that, Alistair Verscoyle in Naas, and we dropped it down to $49.99. So that's the bargain you can get it for right now if you go to books.ie. And he's already sold 4 copies today, as he tells me. And that's it for the moment. So thank you very much. I will try and hand the floor back to John.